Even though Jared Ramos has not been cooperating with detectives, old court documents and Twitter posts are giving police clues about what may have sparked his anger. Here's Justice correspondent Jeff Bouquet.
Investigators say Jared Ramos held a long simmering grudge against the Capital Gazette. A search of his home turned up evidence that he had planned yesterday's attack.
We did find evidence at the residence. I can't go into a whole bunch of details about it, but I will tell you that it's evidence showing the origination of planning.
According to court documents, in 2012, he filed an unsuccessful defamation lawsuit against the paper and a columnist who wrote an article about the allegations he harassed and threatened a former high school classmate. As the case moved through Maryland courts, Ramos wrote on Twitter that he was suing half of the county and making corpses of corrupt careers in corporate entities. In 2013, the Anne Arundel County Police Department investigated online threats Ramos made against the Capital Gazette. The investigating officer noted in the police report that he did not believe Ramos was a threat to employees at the paper. Ultimately, the paper decided not to press charges because it would be like putting a stick in a beehive. Thomas Marquardt was the paper's editor and publisher at the time when the paper was in a different location.
We had given a photo to the front desk with my personal instruction that if anybody that resembled him would come through the door, that they were to call 911.
CBS News Justice and Homeland Security correspondent Jeff Bouquet is in Washington. Jeff, you said the paper opted not to press charges against Ramos in 2013, but was he on law enforcement's radar?
Well, he was on law enforcement's radar in part because the newspaper brought him to the attention of law enforcement, and that was based on some of the words that he was putting on Twitter, words that the newspaper company officials felt were of a threatening nature. And so they did put this on the radar of law enforcement. Police looked into it, but ultimately the newspaper decided not to press charges. And ultimately it was, as we reported, the police officer who was investigating decided that, there didn't appear to be any sort of immediate threat. And, I should say again and emphasize that the paper decided not to press charges out of concern that it could escalate the situation. And so, yeah, he was on their radar in 2013.
And how do police deal with social media threats versus traditional threats? Is there less that they can do? Do they have less leeway when things are posted on social media?
Well, listen, because social media is so prolific these days, there are threats that are being made through social media, and investigators have to investigate them. However, there is a high threshold because you're balancing free speech and whether a crime is being committed. And so there's a high threshold there. Investigators still have to look into it, as they did in this case, and determine whether there is a real threat that warrants an investigation or that warrants an arrest.
Right. And there are probably a lot of fake threats that appear on social media more than in other traditional forums. Jeff, we know that the suspect used a shotgun in this attack. Was it obtained legally? And what more do we know about the weapon?
Well, it was obtained legally, and it was the kind of weapon that that investigators say was a pump-action shotgun. And so in some ways it deviates from the kinds of weapons that we've seen used in these sorts of attacks. But still, it is obviously the type of weapon that can cause mass casualties, as we saw yesterday. But based upon their investigation, law enforcement officials are telling us that this is something that he purchased legally.
Now, since he was on law enforcement's radar, was there any sort of list or something that he could have been on to prevent him from buying a firearm legally? I'm thinking of after the Parkland shooting, there was a state law passed that said that anyone who appeared to be a threat could possibly be put on a list to prevent them from buying a firearm. Anything like that that could have been in play here?
Well, and this is something that could change in the coming days as this investigation unfolds. But as it stands now, it doesn't look like he checked any of those boxes that would have prohibited him from purchasing that shotgun legally. But again, investigators emphasized today they are still putting the pieces of this puzzle together. They still believe that he acted alone. He did not have anyone assisting him in this act. But they are still, in their words, trying to put the pieces of this puzzle together.
And Jeff, as we discussed yesterday, Ramos is not cooperating with police still, even today. How is that going to impact the investigation?
Well, investigators are going to have to find some other ways to put together the pieces of this puzzle. It is unusual the way this has unfolded in terms of his demeanor during questioning. Investigators have been pressing him for information, but according to investigators, he has not cooperated at all. And then there was this business of trying to figure out who he was. He didn't have any ID on him when he was arrested. And then his fingerprints were in the kind of state that made it difficult for investigators to fingerprint him and then come up with an identification. They had to use facial recognition, and that is something that is not done every day, especially in situations like this. So that in itself is unusual. But the fact that he is not cooperating, investigators, they are pros, and they will get the answers that they are looking for. But it just delays the process a little bit.
Jeff Bouquet, thank you so much.
My pleasure.